slowing this train down to the point where people feel like maybe I'm not actually getting a speedy trial?
Yeah, and that's a really important question. Right now, we're actually having sort of a speedy trial crisis because there's so many pending cases, and we've had a lot of crises here in Harris County in particular, but all over the country with COVID. So I'll give you all an example, right? COVID, when it happened, from March of 2020 through, in some cases, as late as 2021, and even until recently, in some places, there have been no trials, period. For a period of 2 years in some places. In Harris County, we started trying cases actually in November or December of 2020, which was the first place in all of Texas to have trials after COVID. I was elected in November of 2020, and I started in January 1st, 2021, and what I noticed was that there had been cases, there were 600 people in jail. Almost all of them hadn't had court in almost a year, since before March of 2020. And then people that were out on bond, similarly, they had just had their cases reset off docket, is what the phrase is, right? That the court administrator just changed the date without really notifying anyone, without anybody really having to sign anything or show up or anything. They just changed the date and kicked it down the line. And that happened in a lot of places, but it also happened here. And so I was faced, when I started on the bench, with 3,000 cases. Many of the people who were affected by those cases hadn't been seen by a judge in over a year. Of course, this not only slows it down for that period of time, but that means that when I get there, that's a lot of things to do. Plus, every month we get, 250 new cases. So that's part of how it happens. It's also who's there and who's present and what they're doing. There's some structural things in our courts that it just depends on who's in leadership and what they're doing. I'm really involved in my cases. I like to learn about them. When people ask me for more time after a certain time, after 6 months really, I ask them why. And I think that there can be cases when the prosecutors are like, oh, we need more time, or the defense is like, oh, we need more time, or the defense is like, oh, the prosecutor needs more time, and nobody really asks them why. So I ask a lot of whys. For example, there might be a case where we're set for trial, and they're like, well, actually, we need a continuance, and I'm like, why? And they're like, well, we haven't gotten the DNA evidence yet. And I'm like, well, if this case is from 2018, and you actually got the DNA samples then, what do you mean you don't have the DNA evidence analysis yet? It's 4 years later. But you really need people in leadership that ask those kinds of questions, because the system can lend itself, in being so big and having so many different people involved in those decisions, it lends itself to having things fall through the crack really easily. And at the scale of any given felony court could have 3,000 cases, imagine what just a sliver of those cases falling through the crack means. I'm not saying what happened in any specific case, but I'm just kind of giving you guys some context on how that could be possible. And it really takes a lot of people being proactive to avoid it.